right, maybe we can get started and then people will trickle in. And this is also recorded for everyone, so we'll upload it to YouTube in a few days. Um, thanks to everyone who has joined. My name is Francisca. I'm currently working on product growth efforts at Amplitude, and with Tim and Apuva, we are running these go-to-market for dev webinars where we try to get experts in front of early stage startup founders and help them with some of the early go-to-market tactics that can be particularly difficult as you're getting started on your journey. I'm really, really excited for today's edition because we have Allie here with us. I'm a big fan of Allie. I'm not going to introduce you, Allie. I'll let you do it, but I'll just say that Allie is an expert in her field, and I'm sure you will all learn so much today from her. I've learned a lot from her working with her in the past, and really hope that I will get to work with her in the future again. But Allie just got married as well, so congrats there. And yeah, thanks so much for joining, Allie. I'll have you talk about the format, introduce yourself, and then kick us off. But I'm here to help moderate. So any questions in the chat, I'll be there for you.
Sweet, that sounds great. So you had great timing with that. Let me switch over to the next slide. Here's a nice photo, just in case you were already looking at me on the screen. And as Francisca said, my name's Allie. I currently lead developer marketing at Census, which is a reverse ETL and operational analytics platform, if you're not familiar. My background is in journalism and technical communications, and so I've been writing and in some form of English for my entire career. I technically got my start in politics and financial journalism. So basically a whole career of like taking really complex things with very dense jargon and like trying to make it human and fun and understandable. I moved over into B2B technical content marketing about 5 years ago and worked at a content marketing agency named Animals that some of you may have heard about in the past. There I kind of realized that there was a massive gap for folks who were marketing to technical audiences when it came to content marketing. A lot of the like really traditional content marketing tactics were kind of failing them, and you have a very like critical audience that generally doesn't like to be marketed to. And so you needed kind of a different approach there. So I spent a couple of years helping to build out their technical content marketing team, working with companies from like AI enterprise to low code to data to a couple crypto companies. We even did like an Israeli drone company at one point, which was a very interesting take. It's kind of everything all over the board. If they were speaking to technical audiences or engineers of some flavor, we were working with them. And then ultimately decided I wanted to focus on kind of one product and get to go deep. And so I moved over to Census last year as their director of content. But I've always sort of believed that content and community should be married together, especially when it comes to, again, these technical audiences. So we merged the departments and everything over or under developer marketing about 6 months ago with the launch of our community, and then also took over events so that it's all in line there. And then, yeah, I just started about 6 months ago, like consulting and everything, just because I've missed like working with early stage founders since you all are in such an exciting spot with starting to kind of build out that relationship with your customers and your go-to-market strategy. So that is a bit about me. That's a lot of words. We can go over into the format of today's call. I apologize for my like super scratchy voice. I've been talking all week. So if you need me to repeat anything, let me know. Since we have an hour together today, I wanted to build in a couple like short Q&As as we go, since I'm throwing a lot of infographics and steps and stuff like that at you. So we'll stop about every like 10-ish minutes. And if you have any questions along the way, just drop them in chat and we'll go through them. I'm going to start off at kind of like a high level of like what I mean by content that works and the difference between like community first content and like your general kind of content marketing that you'll see in like HubSpot articles or like just around the internet. If you Google like how do I do content marketing, what is happening, there are some nuances there on like what to do and what not to do. After that, we're going to talk through a little bit on how it fits into your strategy, as well as about where you should find ideas and how you prioritize those ideas. And then we'll wrap up today kind of talking about how to manage your content pipeline and bring a little bit of order to all of the moving pieces and everything as you start to get writing and get shipping. So. You might be able to hear my dog grumbling in the background, so we'll see how loud he is. Sweet. So what do I mean by content that works? About 10 years ago, everything was kind of about trying to like hack the algorithm, and a lot of like e-commerce blogs and like Twitter content marketing thought leaders you'll see are still kind of on this of like trying to anticipate what Google is trying to rank for. I generally am not a fan of strategies that prioritize that above like human readers. I think, again, especially for technical audiences, you should be putting like humans first, and then it's like SEO flavored as you go. I like to draw the analogy to like cooking with salt, SEO being your salt. If you use like a little bit of it, it enhances it and it like makes the experience better. If you consistently oversalt all of your food, no one will eat what you have. So you need to like strike that balance, use it as an accent, not as the primary thing that you're serving people. And then back into that, like the community first thing. This is again, especially true for technical audiences. But just like listening to the folks who are already customers, who are already in your communities, and making sure that your content is a reflection of the questions they have and the concerns that they have. And isn't you just like talking at them all of the time, will definitely help you build relationships there and also make you a trusted source for people beyond just a product that they're searching for. And if you do that, especially in B2B scenarios where like people are moving companies and they can evangelize for you at their new company, building that like lifelong trust with the folks who are reading your content will really help with the longevity of your product overall. And doing that creates this nice virtuous cycle of content, yet another virtuous cycle of something. So here is a 3-stage virtuous cycle. It's pretty easy to follow. It's basically this flow of, like I said, sourcing content ideas from your community and from user research. Then creating that content, answering those questions, making sure that you are optimizing where it makes sense, and then shipping that content back out to the community for feedback. And if you're doing that at a pretty high volume, at like a pretty good cadence, then you can like get these really lovely, very frequent feedback points from people and pivot your content strategy instead of kind of creating it in a silo. And we'll talk a little bit later on about like distribution best practices and what kind of content goes where. I'm going to throw a lot of infographics at you, so I will also send this deck around afterwards, just so you all can see that. And like Francisca said, it's recorded. So where does this fit into your strategy? The answer is everywhere, which is like not a particularly helpful answer, at least the short one is. But it is like very flexible. You can create community first content that is being fed off of feedback you're getting from your customers and Slack communities, from your CS team, from your sales teams, really everywhere in your funnel. And if you do take this principle of like humans first, algorithm second to all of that, you are ensuring that you're writing really high quality content that resonates with people no matter where those conversations are happening. And this includes everybody from like day -1, from like before they even know your product and like they're not really ready or mature enough for your product, all the way through conversion too. So we'll take a look at the funnel. So this includes like an above the funnel stage, which is a bit of an expansion on like traditional content marketing funnels. So I like to break it down into above the funnel, problem aware, solution aware, brand aware. So like I said, that above the funnel is like pre-customer education, basically. You're making sure that when they're presented with the funnel, ultimately, like they are primed to understand your messaging. They're ready to take action. When they come and talk to you, you're not going to run into this like, oh, you want to do this, but you have all these prereqs that you didn't take care of, and it's not a fit right now. Like you're helping to kind of solve for that. For data companies, for example, since we deal with this a lot at Census, this can be topics like data hiring and like how to make your first hire, where you're like walking the company through how to hire the person that will ultimately be the one who runs through your funnel. And that also helps you create like a more holistic relationship with the entire company as itself, not just your eventual point of contact. Just kind of a long game for like helping to get buy-in to over time. And then for problem aware, this is basically your like opportunity to demonstrate that you get it, quote unquote, when it comes to your customer pain points. This is like your main trust building stage. And your opportunity again to articulate like what people struggle with most, help them identify with your product, and then kind of like get them bought into, you understand them. This is what the name for their problem is, help them start to think through like solutions and everything. And that primes them for that solution aware stage. This is where you start to talk about like your product type, kind of your category type. You're not heavy pitching your product quite yet. I think a mistake a lot of people tend to make with, again, older content marketing philosophies when they try to adapt it to technical audiences is mentioning their product too high in the funnel. And as you'll see, if you've ever tried to promote anything about your product on like Reddit, as soon as there's any like smell of a pitch, they will generally run from that. So making sure that you are introducing your product at the right time when it makes sense, and that you're not letting them kind of feel like it's snake oily before it needs to be. And again, that solution area is where you can start to prime them on the idea of like, oh, hey, this is probably what I need to solve that pain point I just got talked to about a couple articles or a couple weeks ago or whatever as well. And if you're in category creation, this stage is generally where you're going to write those like, what is product type? What is like this product type mean for this persona? That kind of content lives in there. And then finally, brand aware. This is your like heavy pitch point, why we're awesome, why you should go with us, why you should convert content. Generally stuff around like buyer's guides, customer stories, like heavy use cases, stuff like that is really good. And again, ironing down into like the specific persona or like some ABM tactics here, so that no matter what content people are running into, it speaks to them like personally, and they can kind of see why they're being served it at any given time. Alrighty. And then this is my like most beautiful mind graphic I'm going to show you. This is the one where I'm like, take a screenshot or look at the deck afterwards. But this basically breaks down, again, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. Just another way of referring to like that problem aware, solution aware, brand aware piece. This breaks down basically the content types that should live in each one of those lanes, so that you can start to think through most of it. I will say like blog posts are kind of ubiquitous with all of it. I flagged it most as top of funnel as a leverage, but you can put them anywhere in the funnel. But yeah, so you have this nice like pre-conversion funnel. And then you'll notice that I added like a below the funnel, like nurture content at the very bottom. This is basically where you're like teaching your existing customers how to be better customers to make sure that they're staying engaged, that they're not falling off. And also gives you a nice like social cost, basically. If you're really supporting people, there starts to become a social cost for them to switch away from your brand. So that helps with loyalty, the more education and information you're giving them after conversion. But just like there's a different content format that serves each stage of the funnel kind of uniquely, there's a distribution and referral channel that serves each funnel stage in a different way. So making sure that you're promoting your top of funnel content in the places that it makes sense, which is largely social, communities that you're a part of, largely on like Slack and Reddit, distributing that over to publications on Medium and Dev2 is a really easy way to get some additional traffic, since there's audiences built in there, especially when you're really early on in your blog as a new company. You don't have to fight as much for building a list to get eyes if you can just go and distribute it on platforms like that where there's already people. And then third-party newsletters, anything that you can submit to there. We use like Toward Data Science pretty often as an example for that. All right. First Q&A, like 4 infographics in. Happy to answer any questions anybody has about distribution channels, funnel stages, anything like that right now.
There's one question in Slack and then, in chat. And then I also have some questions already, but the first one is like, when it comes to gathering feedback from customers, users, what does that actually look like? Can you walk through sort of the process potentially?
Yeah, for sure. So you get both like quantitative and qualitative feedback for like that virtuous cycle. Your analytics is going to be like the easiest way for you to see what people like, whether you're doing that in like GA, or if Francisca's already pitched you on HubSpot, doing that in HubSpot, whatever your analytics tool of choice is. That's one of the more like objective ways. That doesn't necessarily mean they enjoy all of the content, but it was interesting enough for them to click on it. And that's a nice echo of like the topic, and also what's ranking. We'll talk through in a little bit too, like some of the like SEO auditing you can use in terms of rank and like where it's sitting in Google and what that means. On the qualitative side, this is where like distributing to the communities that you're in really matters. So if you go over on Twitter, like keeping in mind or taking a look at all of the metrics, engagement metrics over time, and what kinds of content and what kinds of social there did the best, that's a good indicator. If you're starting like going over and posting it in Slack, like which ones have the best threading there. I will say, it can feel kind of bad, but ones that start like a giant debate, if people like take a hot take on one of your pieces of content and want to like fight that out, that is a good sign. Like that's an interesting topic. As long as you're not being like factually inaccurate, like that is generally an indication that like that topic area is a good one to explore. But it can feel like a little uncomfy as well. But yeah, I would just pay attention to the chatter that happens around that, any shares or anything. And then like talking to your sales team or talking to anybody who's customer facing in like the prospect process. Generally folks will mention like what content they're coming from. And if you already have something like Clearbit set up too, you can kind of like watch people's content journey and kind of attribute it a little bit more directly that way too.
So funny, Allie, because you're referencing the ongoing war between Census and High Touch and the content you all were producing.
Yes.
If anyone is in the data space, they probably have seen. If not, I will send some links around.
Yeah,
it's very interesting to watch.
A hot reverse ETL war of topics going on. So that's if you're in DBT Slack, that's a good place to pull this from.
There's a lot more questions. There's a specific one, and then there's a few more. So how effective is towards data science?
It varies depending on the kind of content you're putting in there. I think for like general brand awareness for like net new folks, it's pretty good. We generally focus on like having like thought leaders who are associated with us be the ones who write and place there versus like the company logo, which is generally a good policy if you are like distributing over to third-party channels, is to make sure that it's like a human face and byline on that instead of like the company's name, since people will generally trust like a person a little bit more than they will a company in that placement. So when that hits right and it's like the right person with the right background, it's pretty effective. But it is like a little bit of spray and pray at the beginning. You have to sort of like write a bunch of topics and submit and then just see what the performance is on that and kind of hone it over time.
Yeah. There's one that I also was going to ask from Riley. How do you balance above the funnel content versus lower funnel content when you're just getting started? Like you can't do it all. Where should you focus?
Mm-hmm. I think at the very beginning, focusing above the funnel is probably where I would recommend most folks go, since you're trying to mostly help like SEO rankings and awareness. That helps you build like a little bit of your brand and a little bit of your authority more, especially since again, you aren't pitching somebody. So if you spend like the first couple quarters just like really helping to educate and like build up the fact you know what you're talking about, that'll help people's appetite a little bit more when you start to like pitch them and push them down the funnel. So yeah, I would generally recommend like, and we'll talk through this on like prioritizing topics and keywords in this next section, but picking like one or two areas that you like are really important to your positioning and really important to your audience and building out that top of funnel. And then picking one and making sure that you have like a complete journey down the funnel first and then do that second, just so that there's not any like holes in the metaphorical boat that people can slip through that way.
Nice. Yeah. And another one, I don't know, we'll take the questions, I think, and then whenever we're done, we'll jump back in, but maybe we'll put a time on it. But this one was also one I had, so I'm going to ask it. So it's from Tim. So is there any category creation examples that you think did the best from a content point of view? And I want to caveat, like, my question was going to be like, what is your take on category creation and timing? Like, I also speak to a lot of startups. They're like, oh, like we're creating a new category. I'm like, that's maybe too early. it takes a lot of time and resources to create a category. You might need to talk to Gartner and Forrester and all these things. So maybe, you know, examples if you have any, and then also like timing. I'm curious, like your thoughts on like how to think of this as a young startup.
Yeah, back into the Census high touch rivalry. Both of our sites do that pretty well for category creation around reverse ETL and operational analytics. We've been duking it out over the same like 2 keywords with the same like 3 blog posts for like a year and a half over this. If you are like genuinely fully the only one in that category, like there's a little bit less pressure and you can be a little bit more precious with it. But it's like such a sweet spot, because if you wait slightly too long on it, then like you lose a little bit of authority as competitors pop up for your product. And you do want to have like that timestamp date of like, this was our thing. Like you can look back on our blog and you can see that this date is here and this was ours. But by that same token, like I would focus much more on trying to like write content to the like existing categories that exist and the existing pain points of your customers, so that you can start to like build that relationship before you would focus everything on category creation. That also gives you a little bit of an opportunity to start to test the messaging around your category creation. I think especially like in early stage companies, like everyone's very hyped on the category, and we kind of forget that like outside the company, no one knows what this thing is.
No one knows.
You need to pressure test, like, do these words make sense? Like, is this like, is the first impression we feel with these words the first impression that customers feel with these words? And doing a little bit of like brand testing there. And lower stakes, higher frequency blog posts and community posts and social can kind of help you like battleground test that a little bit, narrow in on what that the name for that category is as you get started.
Yeah, even qualitatively, right? In sales calls and others, like test different messaging and then see what resonates with the user on the other end. Like, oh, that makes sense, or like, I don't understand what you're saying right now. That can also help guide.
Yeah, that's a great tactic too.
Oh, we have two more. So short answers, Allie. Otherwise, we won't get further. But this is great. I love the engagement from the audience. So, or do we have three more? Did I skip one? Yeah. Any sense for the timeline or engagement behavior of a user as they move down the funnel?
I think it depends on how much buy-in and how much friction there is in like adopting your product. If you're I'll use like Monte Carlo as an example. Like there's like a lot that has to happen in order for that product to be adopted. And so they have a much longer timeline in content consumption between like first touch and like that final conversion, since they're convincing so many people of so many different parts. If you are like all the way on the other side of the spectrum on like the PLG end, where like they don't need to talk to anybody, they can just like get in, sign up, get started, put a card in. Generally it should be like much shorter. But I would say probably like 50% of people's time is generally on like top of funnel content where they're like learning, evaluating, identifying, and probably like 20 or 30% in that middle of like educating. And then like bottom of funnel is generally the shortest. If you're educating them quickly, they should be able to get through like bottom of funnel content, make a decision on whether or not that's for them without dragging that out too much. And you can like lead score based on content. You can do like content qualified lead scoring. And that's where like Clearbit and stuff comes in, and you can kind of support with your sales team that if people have consumed like this particular path of high value content or this many content pieces, that they should be reached out to, and you can kind of use that as an indicator for how warm that lead is.
Yeah, I'm going to take one more and then I'm going to give it back to you, and then we can take the others later, but this one is really good, so I think this is super important. How do you measure the success of your content and what metrics do you track?
Yeah. So this, again, it's like kind of an it depends answer. But at the beginning, I would say it's largely like awareness, which is going to be your like net new users, the page views that you see, your conversion between content, not necessarily your conversion rate, like from bottom of funnel is generally what I'm concerned with. So like how often people go one more article in or two more articles in. And then return visits. So like how often they're bookmarking it or coming back like a week or two later to come and read something else. If you have newsletters or you have that set up, like signups off content is also a really good sign. And then that way you can do some like email collection too, which is really nice. And then on the social side, like the amount of traction it's getting either in shares or comments over time, but that can also be affected by the quality of your social copy. So that one's a little bit trickier to directly correlate with content all the time.
Allie, do you also keep track in Ahrefs or something, maybe like how your content is ranking over time? So like if it's SEO specific, like, hey, we moved from like page 2 to, position 5, like that kind of view.
Yeah, that is also a good one. Again, it depends on like how mature your content is. Like if you're completely starting out on a new blog and you have like a very low DR, I would like not torture yourself with your rank for the first like 30 or 60 days and just like focus on the muscle and like writing the content. If you already have like 3 or 4 months of content in your backlog like pretty consistently, that's when you start to have like enough data and enough traffic that you can like start to play with trying to optimize for those. But definitely keeping aware of like where your site and where your blog ranks overall for those keywords, and then what specific blog posts are the ones that are pushing that the most, is a really good way to make sure that you're keeping that health score up.
All right, I'm going to keep the last 2 questions for later, just to make sure that we have a little bit more of your time. I know you prepared a presentation, so.
Yeah, that sounds good. So this is into how to find content ideas. Delicious bush pizza, courtesy of Ron Swanson. So there's kind of like 3 buckets or 3 sources that I think of when I'm trying to come up with content ideas. One is like SEO and competitive research, okay, like what are your competitors doing on their blogs? One of them is like community industry questions trends. So that's questions that are happening in product forums and Slack communities, on Reddit, news articles that are being written, all of those kind of like more time sensitive things that are in direct response to like people, generally individual versus like org level decisions. And then the last is internal, especially if you're category creating, like you are the expert on this thing that you were talking about. And so making sure that you're being like the first actor in all of that, and like tapping into your thought leaders and the like earned experience that you're creating as you're building that kind of content. Also, as you recruit and like try and hire more engineers, is always like very valuable to people. So we'll kind of talk through like the approach for this and then how you build them together. So this is a wall of text. Again, this is a good thing to take a look back at afterwards. There's a few different steps for SEO. The first one is mostly just like finding a tool that you don't mind using. There are a lot of them out there. It's mostly down to dealer's choice. They're all kind of like guessing at the Google algorithm. So objectively, one over the other is like, you're not going to lose out on like a major opportunity because the tool that you choose here, as long as you have a tool there that you are consistently checking and measuring against, you're generally going to be fine. I have a preference for a combination of Ahrefs and keywords everywhere. Ahrefs does a really good job of auditing like your current site and taking a look at what you rank for right now, what that movement is. It's not as good for like exploring in technical content areas, as I've noticed, because if it has less than like 100 volume in terms of monthly searches, Ahrefs can just say like 0, no one has ever talked about that, even though you know that's not like objectively true at the beginning. So that's where Keywords Everywhere comes in. This one basically just runs as a Google extension. You buy some credits, and then every time you do a Google search, it will return the competition monthly volume, the cost per click, and then it will give you a list of like all of the trend information, trend data, and all the long-tail keywords too. So that one's great for like keyword exploration, but not for analysis. The two of them together kind of help fill each other's gaps. And then once you have your tool that you really like, just starting to audit your existing messaging and positioning. So this goes into like how you want to be talking about your product right now, what main words keep coming up. If you're creating a category, like what are the supporting things around that category? What main tools you integrate with today? As you plan your roadmap, like what are the main like feature trees that you are planning? That's a really good place to start to like plan out for the rest of the year where you want to be talking. And then also what keywords or like what themes do your customers use to describe you when you first start talking to them? You can just ask them like, how did you find out about us? What was the decision tree to you like kind of realizing this was a solution that might work for you? And those kind of conversations can help you like map what the evolution of topics and keywords to you as the endpoint looks like. And then you'll want to obviously do some competitor research. This is kind of the same lens. You're just going over to their site, looking at what words they're using for their product. You can like literally make a word cloud out of it. I've done this with competitor resources before, where you can like see what they're trying for, and then you can run their URL through Ahrefs to see what they're ranking, like actually ranking for. And that will also give you a little bit of a delta on like if what they're doing works in terms of messaging and what Google actually thinks that it is. So just pulling out like the top 5 or 10 keywords that you pull from that. And then there's like another competitor type that's content competitors. This is generally like individual writers. So if there's some folks on Medium who are like very influential about your space, but are not directly tied to a competitor company, those are still your competitors, just in like a slightly more wholesome way. In the future, you might be able to like get them to write for you too, which is also great. But taking a look at what kind of content they write and how they describe the space that you're in will also give you some pretty good indicators on keywords that are already in people's minds that have been primed by influencers. And then it's spreadsheet time. There's gonna be a lot of spreadsheets in this particular step. So create a spreadsheet of your choice and basically just write down all of the keywords that came out of you doing an audit of your messaging, your product competitor, and your content competitors. And then you can rank them basically on two qualities. One is brand priorities, like how important is this to how we see our product today and how we see our product tomorrow. And then within those categories, I just focus on the most important two. Start to run those keywords through like Ahrefs or keywords everywhere to get an idea of the competition and the traffic. And you're going to find a sweet spot in each one of those categories for the highest volume, lowest difficulty keywords that are the most relevant to your brand. And then if you're working on like a low domain rating, which is basically your site's pretty new and Google doesn't know that you're an authority on the thing you're writing about, you're going to have to take like a bit of a long journey to help like get those keywords ranking, especially if you're in a space where there's already like a large player who has a lot of backlinks, has a lot of keywords. Google has already decided that they're pretty strong. So there's this tactic called the Hubbmans Book we'll talk through in a couple minutes. It's basically a combination of like the main keyword you're focusing on and then the long tail keyword that's around it. So for us, we write about like reverse ETL, operational analytics. Those are both the short tail keywords, and the long tail keyword is like, what is reverse ETL? How does reverse ETL compare to like other product types? What are use cases for reverse ETL? Those like longer kind of like test answer like queries that you would put to Google. And then after you have all of this in a spreadsheet, all these lovely keywords, spend a few minutes just like jotting down topics that you often talk to your customers about, or questions that you get about, or like ideas that are on sticky notes around your desk if you're like me for content ideas, and map them to the like very obvious keywords if they have an obvious keyword match. Because that way you can start to see like the two birds, one stone, like this is a strong topic and I can also make it better by optimizing for this target keyword too. And then community and industry content, a lot less steps for this one. To start, you're going to go ahead and revisit your content competitor blogs and influencers, but this time you're going to do it through the lens of like, what is getting the most traction? You can search URLs for like popular blogs that you know people talk about a lot on Twitter and on Slack spaces. You can go and like find the conversation around them, and just take note of like which ones got the most traction and then what feedback was added in those conversations. A really good way to improve on popular resources is to basically like look at the original one, look at the conversation that happens afterwards, and then write a follow-up piece that includes like a summary of that kind of conversation or addresses some of the points people brought up after that first piece was publicized. And so you can do like a new and improved version of it or a response to it in that way. After that, going into product communities that are relevant to you. These are largely ones that you're going to integrate with. So like for us, DBT is a big one. They obviously have a very large like support forum and support presence. And so you can go into those product communities and basically just search by popular within the last year, and any thread that has a bunch of replies, that topic or that question somebody had about troubleshooting is generally a good one that you can take and just write like a guide to. We've done stuff on like DBT permissioning before because people have a lot of questions about that, modeling for PLG, those kinds of more like above the funnel, top of funnel topics. And then that also gives you a nice, like, depending on the policies of the product community, like built-in distribution channel. So after you write the piece, you can go back to the people who are asking that question and be like, hey, we saw this and we created a resource. Like, here's a full in-depth walkthrough on how to solve your problem. That works really well in like Quora and Reddit as well. If you're being like pretty good about it, not pitching your product as a solution unless it actually is a solution, the community responds pretty well to it. And then finally, Reddit and Slack. Again, same thing. You're kind of searching for like hot topics, hot questions. If somebody just posted like a one-off question in a Slack community you're part of, and it's sort of like a huge discussion, if that's something that's like either relevant to your product or relevant to the kinds of people who would buy your product. Those discussions are generally good ones to turn into content if you need the ideas. Bonus if like you can write that as the founder and like really inject like your personal opinion, personal take with that. That also gives people something to like measure against or the debate over again. Because data Twitter likes to argue about things, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. So you can get some free exposure and everything there too. And then back into the spreadsheet, go ahead and create like a community content sheet within that same workbook as your SEO ideas, and then just like copy and paste all the ones that you found throughout those 3 methods into there, and then we'll revisit stitching them together too. And then internal ideas. These kind of split into 2 categories. One is generating net new, and one is reusing stuff you've already done. Generating net new is largely about creating like a written culture around content ideation, especially if you're a remote team. Just creating like a content ideas Slack channel will help a lot, and then just telling people like, you think there should be a blog on this, or if you want to write one, just like dump it in there as a note. And that way you can kind of see the idea bank as it goes through, and you all can like discuss content ideas and get more opinions internally. Scheduling like reoccurring brainstorming sessions once a month also has really helped a lot of companies that I've worked with, so that you have that like dedicated time to sit down and think about content. Content ideation and content writing are both things that I think like almost every single person, myself included, like underestimates the time it takes to do that. And so optimistically you'll have to like, oh, well, I'll do that on Friday for 15 minutes, and then Friday happens. So having this like recurring, we're all going to sit down and we're going to talk about like what the key questions are, what's happening in our industry, and what our takes are around that, will ensure that you're continuing to generate like interesting thought leadership ideas that highlight your expertise. Reviewing your support queue for frequently asked questions is also a really easy one. If you or sales folks are talking about the same question over and over and over again, it's a good indication that you can write content about it and also save yourself some breath. And just send it to prospects, or hopefully they will see it beforehand. You can add it to like an email onboarding sequence so that they see it before they talk to you. And that can help make the sales calls and everything more efficient, and also prime them better for conversion. And then again, talking to your sales team and your CS team, largely within the context of figuring out like the main reasons people say no to you, can also be a really valuable content source. Because then you can start to anticipate like what that no is and what the objection is in your top of funnel content, and kind of help to get them off of that before they talk to you. So they're a little bit more favorable there. And then reusing existing content. This is probably the easiest one. If you are like very resource strapped, you don't want to hire somebody, you just want content right now, but you've talked before at conferences, this is the fastest for sure. So just going back and looking at any podcasts or conference talks you've given, and just like spending a half hour basically rewriting your talk track into an article. Bonus if you have a deck, since you can just like copy and paste those slides as inline images for those blog posts, and that makes them much better. And then if you have published content in the past, looking at what you can repurpose or like refresh. And this is basically content that had like a big spike in traffic at the beginning, and then it fell off a whole bunch, or is now out of date. Both of those types you can spend, again, like a half hour, 45, just like updating, adding some new images, updating any stats. If you have new use cases or customers, throwing those in there. That helps both the reader experience and Google. It shows that you're updating your assets, which is like a nice recency score. So the algorithm does look fondly upon that. So. And then this is the Hubbmans Book thing that I talked about. This is all about connecting all 3 pools of ideas. Again, with that last bit of like internal ideas, you want to create yet another sheet in that workbook, dump all of them in there. And then you're going to do a fun, like kind of pin the tail on the donkey example with your SEO. So you can look at the keywords that don't have ideas next to them from your first little brainstorming session. And then look at the topics and ideas that came out of community and internal research. And again, just find like the obvious fit, focusing just on like the top 2 most important kind of keyword clusters or keyword themes to your product positioning. And then if there are any keywords that like still need a home, you can just basically search Google for what people are writing right now and compare probably within the first 3 articles, like what they have in common, and then what you know that they don't mention. And you can start to kind of see like what Google likes to see in those, and then also figure out like what unique take and what unique knowledge you can add to that. And then those themes, I generally, again, recommend like 1 to 2 will serve as your hubs in terms of your content. And again, this is largely built to help like the content user journey so that folks see like a bunch of related content that helps them further educate on the theme, as well as like the SEO value of your content, since you're optimizing for an entire topic tree, and Google starts to see like, oh, you write about this one thing, and then like you wrote about like the 7 things people ask afterwards. And so that makes Google think that you are an expert on this, which all of you are if it's key to your brand. So you can basically spend like 1 or 2 months at a time writing like the main content, and then writing like the supporting unique ideas around it. And then you just want to make sure that all of them link back and forth to each other, especially that main content piece, that it has links to all of the subsequent like child pages that you write around it. All right, second Q&A.
Nice. Yeah, and there's a few questions from the last part that I will just quickly take. Also, just a side story related to what you shared, Allie. When I was at Itatively, we talked to an early customer. We wanted them to be a customer. They didn't become a customer, and they had a content idea that was really good. And I wrote an article on it, and then I shared it with them. And they're a bit of a thought leader in the data space, and so they liked it, and they started sharing that piece of content whenever someone had a question related to that. And while that is not like super scalable, but it's a good example of like, you know, listening to customers and understanding the challenges and finding gaps, and then they will share content for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great like side effect of like writing content that's directly related to somebody's question. It's also, I think, just makes people like feel good that like you put the resources into answering their question in the written form. And I mean, there are articles that like I thought were good advice or answered a question of mine in like 2015, and like that's the article I still share with people when somebody else has that same question. So there is like some weird like content bookmark loyalty if you create an asset that somebody like forms an emotional bond with too, so it can get a really nice shelf life out of that.
For sure. All right, I'm gonna ask the question here. So I think this one fits nicely. So it's how for B2B go-to-market content, how does the strategy change when you're focused not on developers, but old school enterprise users?
Yeah, so the strategy with like, especially enterprise users, is a much longer form. And I think like a little bit more complex in that you generally have to like speak to different personas all at once on your blog, because there's so many different like touch points and influencers in terms of whether or not they ultimately convert. And so making sure that you have a really clear definition of what like the decision tree is for your product to be adopted. Because the people who are generally the first person to find your blog or your site are generally not the people who ultimately sign the check. Like those tend to be different personas. And then third to that, like the people who use your product most every day are probably like yet another persona to that. And so making sure that you have content that is created to like the pain points, and again, that solution and like the outcomes that each one of those people care about is really good. And we do like just straight up education on like how to engage with decision makers within your company to get tools that you like adopted. And so writing guides like that or emails like that for that first person who like wants the product but doesn't have the buy-in or needs the buy-in, and helping them basically like create the path to like getting stakeholder sign off, that will generally help. Eventually, when you get to a pretty high content volume, you'll have to like fragment your blog a little bit more than like traditional, like we only talk to developers or like an e-commerce site is going to have to, because it'll start to get confusing since you're talking to 3 different people about 3 different levels of like business use case and business outcome. You'll want to create like in our case, like an engineering blog, like an ops marketing blog, and then like a data engineering blog, so that it's not like confusing for the people as they navigate through the site and they know what content's for them.
And then we have a specific question on tooling. So what's the Clearbit tools that you were mentioning in the beginning? And how does it differ to something like HubSpot that also gives you page view info?
Yeah, so Clearbit is identifying on the user IP as they come in. And so you can kind of set with them basically a model for like what your ideal customer is. So if you know it's companies that have like a certain amount of funding, a certain amount of size, and they're within a certain industry, you can set that as a parameter, and Clearbit will basically let you know when an IP address belonging to somebody who fits into that demographic visits your site. And it will generally also give you the company name. I'd say like 60% accuracy on it, because there's a lag with like if your IP was previously associated with your like last employer and then you switch jobs and now you're looking at that site, it takes it about like a month generally to like figure out that you're no longer with that employer and you're not somewhere else. But yeah, it's a great tool for like what kinds of companies are checking out your site, as well as like what kinds of content those companies are looking at and in what order. It takes a little bit more on like the data lift like implementation side, but it is like really, really great, especially if you're building out ABM campaigns with content.
Yeah, we have another one. Did you have 2 parts or 1 part left?
I have 1 part left.
Okay. We're okay. There's one here on backlinks, which is also super important. I've been advised to link to other blog posts, then email those other writers and ask if they would link back. So that's one idea. Any other good ideas for backlinks, and how valuable are backlinks?
It depends. Again, another it depends answer with like how valuable backlinks are. Backlinks from sites that are like really closely related to you and your product, and especially backlinks from sites that have a higher domain rating than you do, which you can check any website's domain rating with Ahrefs. Those ones are great. And especially if you get backlinks from like news organizations, .edus, .govs, .orgs, those have more like SEO juice than your average website does. The extreme version of this is like hiring an agency to build backlinks for you. And like at a certain point, it gets like pretty spammy. And if you do that across too many unrelated websites, Google will actually start to like penalize you for trying to hack like basically their algorithm. So making sure that it is like directly related and that the link that you were asking for like makes sense. If you're resource strapped, I would generally focus more on like kind of the influencer marketing, like trying to get guest writers who can like go and place it on their own sites, and like partnership blog posts with companies that you work with, and like trying to reach out for backlinks, just in terms of what has the most like impact on your visibility and like what people respond to most. It is very much like more for SEO than it is for like the humans that will end up on your blog. The backlinks help your ranking, but like you can kind of think about like how you go through content. If you read a blog post, like how likely are you to actually click on the links that are embedded within that text? Unless it's something that's like pretty data heavy, I generally don't. And so you're not getting that much like traffic through that referral most of the time, unless it is something, again, like a news article or something that has like a hard stat. That is a great case though for like creating really valuable like first party data pieces. If you can do any research or like do any customer polling or anything like that, people will link to that. You get a lot of backlinks from it, and it also makes it a lot easier to convince people that they should be linking to your site if you can come and offer them like a stat that backs up their article or something like that too. And yeah, in terms of like emailing other writers, again, as long as it's like pretty relevant, I would. It depends on where the writer is. If they're like an individual person, they're probably pretty open to it. If it's like an org, it might get ignored because like marketing and content people get hit up a lot every single day with people asking for garbage backlink requests. So it can get lost in like the noise of spammy people on like LinkedIn and the internet, unfortunately. But yeah.
Well, what I found as well is like doing your press release, a funding announcement, and then getting that on the business wire, which means that it just gets distributed around the US and around the world. You can choose your countries. I think that also generally, if you start from scratch, then suddenly now you have some backlinks, and it all helps. So that's an easy way to get from 0 to 1.
Yeah, for sure. And same with like newsletters too. Help like really going hard on trying to place in relevant industry newsletters will help you with backlinking. And if you have like a decent amount of like hot takes that you can use for thought leadership, trying to earmark like one a month or like 2 a quarter for placement on third-party websites like TechCrunch, and pitching for that will also really help. The links from them are very strong. And then also like their audience is a lot more likely to share that or to quote it later on. So that can be a really nice way to get some like really high value traffic back from backlinks too.
Yeah. All right, Allie, we have 9 minutes left. I will pass it back to you.
I'll speed run the tips and we can do final questions. So this is basically secondhand gold from like running content ops for a lot of blogs. There's like kind of 7 main things that I generally recommend folks focus on. You have all of these ideas. I think, especially if you're early stage and a founder, we struggle with this too, like having too many good ideas and saying no to them and prioritizing them can then create like a blockage in your pipeline. So if you focus on like building your content foundation really well at the beginning, that'll help you scale so you don't just like create a billion ideas, write some of them, and then just like break because you can't get through all the draft review. So the first one's hire experts. That's kind of self-explanatory. There's a couple different ways you can approach this. At the very beginning, hiring an agency or a consultant to help you like figure out your strategy, kind of lay the foundation for what your like 30, 60, 90 should look like, what your OKR should look like, can really help. And it also gives you a little bit of time to hire full-time. So if you start at the beginning with an agency and then start your job search around the same time, those two generally like hand off very smoothly one to the other. In terms of like FT hire order, I generally recommend folks try and hire for a senior content person before they hire for a content manager, especially if you've hired an agency, hiring somebody who can come in and run that agency for you, and then hiring somebody in-house who's like the writing machine is generally like the smoothest way to scale that up without doing like a lot of strategy shifts in between. Number 2 is investing in your content stack. You can do all of this in whatever CMS you're already using in a Google Doc, but there are tools that will make your life a lot easier. Project management is a really big thing in this. Like Asana is great. Something like Monday is also great. Just making sure there's a source of truth on like where your drafts are, what ideas are, what stage they're at when they were reviewed. That will also help just keep things in order. Evaluating your existing CMS to make sure like it's the best fit for your blog. If you use something like Webflow and you have a lot of people in it, it can be prohibitive to access since it can like boot you based on keys. If you have something like Ghost, but you want a lot of like guest authors, like that can be kind of brittle just based on like how it handles bylines. So identifying like what like your dream state of your blog is and making sure the features of your current CMS make sense with that. HubSpot has, again, a lot of really good features for running a blog pretty easily. And if you do have like one person who is running your blog, I generally do recommend like Webflow over something like Ghost. And then, yeah, investing in the tools that you use to write your content, especially if you are not a writer by trade, if you don't have an in-house copywriter, like there are some that can help you out. Grammarly is great. Hemingway is great, but can be weird about technical content topics. So as you know, there are just certain words that correctly refer to your space that there isn't a workaround for that it will flag. So like taking that one with a grain of salt. And then there's a tool called ClearScope that's really great for SEO optimization too. So if you don't know like a lot about it and you don't want to learn a lot about like what goes into doing SEO really, really well on page, that's a great one. It basically just runs like Grammarly. You tell it what keyword you want, you drop your draft in, and it will tell you what to do to make it a stronger ranking piece. Identifying a content owner. This is basically who is going to be the main writer, be the person putting in your CMS, writing the social for it. This person should also own reporting. And then having some folks who can step in just to do internal editing support on different subject matter areas. But just being clear up front, this can be like a racy thing if you wanted to use that framework, but having that on paper so people know who to go to and who's responsible for what. So this thing called the chaos lane that I built into a lot of my strategies. Building 100% SEO strategy is kind of boring. And so I would generally recommend folks only put like 80% of their content capacity in that SEO Hubbmans Book, and they reserve about 20% for like fun ideas. If your engineering team builds something cool and you want to write about it, like do that, that's fine. Same thing with like, if there's some interesting industry thing that happens or product news you need to write about, like this way you're not compromising content that needs to be written. and content that like is good for your SEO and news space for both. Sorry. Can I get my voice to not be froggy? It's gonna be the question. Tapping into your network. So this means like customers, folks who are influencers, other founders that you know, finding folks who can guest write for you will also really, really help at the beginning. Obviously, like pay those people too. You'll get a lot more writers if you pay them. A valuable thing. But it also brings a new perspective into your feed, and it builds the authority of your brand to have all of these additional bylines on there, especially from higher profile folks in your community. Shipping often over perfectly. This goes back into the cycle piece. It can be hard, especially if your bylines on it, to like let a piece go when you know you can make it like 10% better. But if like the enemy is, or the perfect is the enemy of good, really rings true with content. I'd say get it to like 80 or 90% and then just ship it. The feedback you will get from your community is worth more than that like 10% of polish that you'll get. And you can always come back and improve something too later on if you like want to update it and fix it. And then yeah, measuring regularly. I generally recommend like surface reporting for metrics at the end of every month, and then like strategic adjustment every 3 months. That 90-day mark generally gives your content enough room to breathe, so that you can kind of get an idea on like whether or not it's actually good. But I would generally plan, or I've generally seen all the content to like, sorry, dying.
2 minutes left. We're getting so close.
We will see. There we go. Yeah, measuring on like a higher strategic level about every 3 months is good. You'll find that most of your content will follow the Pareto principle. So about 80% of your traffic will come from about 20% of your content. So making sure that you take time to like figure out what that 20% is. And that kind of content will give you an indication of like where you should dive deeper in terms of your future topics. And that we did it. Gosh, the last question slides. I'm happy to chat. I know the last ones.
Nice. I think people are dropping on the hour. Allie, thank you so much. I think this is the most engagement we've had so far. All the questions. It's been awesome. Really useful. I think at least for me. Just a reminder for everyone on the call. Allie does some advising on the side as well. So if you are looking for more hands-on help with this, Allie is your person. And there's her email as well. So we can share the presentation as well and the recording. And then do let us know. We have another session next month on community specifically. So a nice addition and follow up from this one. But let us know after that. We don't have any topics planned. So if there's anything that you all want to learn about, ping us on LinkedIn or email or whatever, and give us your ideas. Thank you so much, Allie.
Yeah, sure thing. And yeah, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to just shoot me an email. I'm always happy to share content. So
awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.